as long as Congo is not free, Africa can move forward. It's the only African countries with non-bordering nations with wealth that can transform the African continent. That Kwame Nkrumah already knew this in the 40s and he fought to liberate his country when in his Independence Day speech saying that the independence of Ghana is meaningless if it's not tied to the total liberation of the entire African continent. And then in his plan of a United States of Africa, guess where the capital was? Kinshasa. When you read Challenge of the Congo, you actually read the plan. What did he think of the Congo? Because of its potential.
We're worried, anxious group of people trying to move along. Maybe one day we'll get onto something. Until then, we say, hold on.
Salam and hello, everybody. My name is Lily Bakala Piper, and thank you, as always, for joining us today. If you are like me and you're a Pan-Africanist at heart, the last few years, as we have watched political and social movements across our continent, a headline that we've seen over and over and over again is about the plight of the people in the Democratic Republic of Congo. I've been thinking about the DRC a lot lately for the last year, just over and over again, sitting with the headlines, sitting with what's happening, sitting with the grief of watching what's happening, but also sitting with the little bit that I know about the DRC, about the beauty of its national parks, several UNESCO World Heritage Sites there, with the dynamic cultural history, the home of rumba and other beautiful musical and cultural arts, the fact that it's our second most populous country, our fourth most populous country and second largest country in the continent, over 110 million people there, that it's the home of Lumumba, whom we almost named our son after. It's a place that's near and dear to people that I love, the home of people that I love. And I had the privilege to visit Kinshasa many years ago. So I've just been thinking about DRC and thinking, what does this moment mean for us as a broader Pan-African community? What should we know? What should we understand better? And a few months ago, if you were with us when we interviewed Amnesty International Kenya Director Irungu Houghton, he talked about how important it was that we continue to keep our eyes on DRC as the events in the Middle East were unfolding. As post-10/7, the events started to shift all the political and media attention to Israel and to Gaza, he urged us to keep our eyes on DRC. And while we're keeping our eyes on DRC, of course, we're keeping our eyes on Sudan, we're keeping our eyes on Ethiopia. It can feel at times quite heavy, but I think sometimes that heaviness is because we don't have a full understanding. Maybe we only read the headlines. Maybe we don't go further. Maybe we don't go deeper. Maybe we don't pause enough to really sit with and understand what this moment in history and time means for not only the people of DRC, but for the continent. DRC is the heart of this continent. Literally, it sits just in the heart of geographically, but the population, the history, the resources, the importance of the country cannot be understated. So I have a dear friend here in Nairobi who is Congolese, and I was just talking with her, and I was like, Pamela, I want to do an episode about this. Who can you connect me to help me understand better, but also to offer our listeners a lens into the DRC, both now and before? And she immediately was like, I know exactly who you should talk to. And it is truly my honor today to have Kambale Musavuli with us to help us understand more deeply what this moment means for DRC, for the continent, and historically why it really matters that we pay attention and keep our eyes on DRC. Let me tell you a bit about our brother Kambale. Kambale is a native of the DRC and one of the leading and political and cultural Congolese voices. He's a social entrepreneur and an international human rights advocate working with progressive organizations across the African continent. He's recognized for his efforts of raising awareness about the political and social issues in the DRC and advocating for justice and equality. If you know Kambale's work, you know it spans multiple media platforms, and he has been speaking out on behalf of the people of the DRC for years. He has been in multiple campaigns, Friends of the Congo. He's worked with young people. His perspective emphasizes the importance of recognizing and addressing systemic inequalities, historical injustices, and human rights violations that impact vulnerable populations. In addition, he's a professional technologist and a techno activist and the founder of Aether Strategies, a tech consulting firm providing cybersecurity training for African institutions. He's currently an analyst for the Center for Research on Congo, with a focus on Kwame Nkrumah's legacy in the development of Ghana through a Pan African lens. So, truly, it is just an honor to have Kambale joining us today from Accra. Kambale, Karibu Sana, and Asante Sana for being with us this morning.
Thank you, thank you. You're about to put me to shame. I need to polish my Swahili. I'm from North Kivu. I still have my Swahili. It's not Swahili Bora. It's mixed with French and English and Lingala, but I can hear Swahili well.
Oh, well,
Asante for having me.
that is the beginning and the end of my Swahili for this episode. So don't worry, you're safe. You're very much safe, and you've put me to shame with the number of languages I'm sure you know. So, Kambale, you have been involved deeply, both, a son of the DRC and an advocate for her. And so, tell us, at what point you go from being a native son to a native advocate and your journey for social justice for the people of the DRC.
It's a complex question, and it's very humbling that people easily recognize my name because of the work I've done. Many people have helped me get there. Even use the example of this interview. You and I would not have been speaking if it wasn't for a Congolese woman connecting me to you.
Yes.
And that's been the story of my life, that many Congolese women have actually helped in our work, providing me the platform. So I always want to make sure that every time people see me, they know there are many, many people who are helping in the background, mostly Congolese women who are saying, hey, you speak English, you were lucky to be a refugee in the United States, you understand international culture and how to share the message. Be our voice since you have the platform. So that's really how I engage in the first place. Yeah, the second point is 2008. Um, I arrived in the United States in 1998 as a refugee when the Second War started. Went to school, worked, pretty much settled in the US. In 2008, in the fall of 2008 in the United States, it was homecoming at my university, A&T. And at the same time that homecoming was taking place, there was a rebel leader by the name of Laurent Kunda who was threatening to take over Goma. And my grandmother at the time, she lived in Beni. And I remember vividly my mother trying to get in touch with my grandmother. So what rebel militias usually do whenever they get into areas that they control, they destroy cell towers. So it's hard to communicate with people who are in that community. So my mom could not reach my grandma. We just assumed that the cell towers in the area were destroyed. And my mom was crying. And at the same time, I have my friends from school who are preparing for the football game and enjoying homecoming. And at that time, I stopped what I was doing and I went online searching with any string I could find news on the Congo. When I was looking for the news articles, I was not looking for the news article to find out what was going on. We have family, we know the situation. The only reason why I was searching for the news articles is because that I knew that there are some AP journalists who takes photos of refugees who are running from the war, and I was hoping that I would see one of the images of people running from the conflict and maybe see my grandmother. And I did that for days. Like, no, just looking at these images. Is that my grandmother? Is that my grandmother running? And that touched me so much that I actually quit my job at that time. I stopped everything I was doing. And I was very, very angry that 10 years after I had left the Congo, my mother had to cry because she could not get in touch with her mother, who's my grandmother, simply because there was a rebel leader trying to take over a city and causing mass displacement. So as I stopped everything, contacted friends of the Congo at the time, told them that I would like to volunteer for the organization. Uh, they accepted for me to join the organization, became the student spokesperson and a student organizer and national spokesperson for the organization. And they trained me. The reason why I reached out to them at the time is that they were the only organization at the time who were not speaking about the situation, that were not speaking about the situation in the Congo from the prism of people are dying. Please donate to us to help the orphans or the king. It's
Right.
needed, right? But it was not from a humanitarian perspective. What they were saying was the war in the Congo is a resource war waged by US and British allies. And I told myself, who are these people in Washington just calling it out, right? So during the train me, I read a lot of reports. I mean, even up until now, every time the UN publish any report, I don't think there is one UN report I have not read. And when you read it, it helps you really understand that the world powers know, right?
Mm.
If UN group of experts are writing the situation, they know. The Security Council know. The documentation is very clear about all actors, be it Congolese or foreign. It's really well documented. And that gave me that I said that fire to say, for some reasons, I'm among the lucky ones who left the Congo. For some reason, I'm among the lucky ones who have platforms to share the story of the Congo. How do I best use it to tell the story of the Congo, not just for people to know, but for it to end?
Yeah.
Because it's affecting people we know, our loved ones, our
Mm.
friends, our family members.
Kambale, you've captured what many of us are sitting with and have been for this last many years. How do we live life and still actively, intentionally stay connected to the places we call home? You know, for me, it's Ethiopia. It's also Kenya. For you, it's the DRC and other places. You know, your work has definitely touched other countries. And you took quite a dramatic step to quit your job and actually say, full time, I need to do this, which really speaks to me more of a calling that you had to play this role. It's been many years since that moment for you personally and for the country. What have the last, that was, gosh, how many years? That's almost 15 years now. How has the story changed 15 years later than when you first decided to put 100% of your effort into speaking on behalf of the people of the DRC?
The story has not changed much, and that was fascinating. I usually say jokingly with my colleagues that I don't prepare for interviews because I repeat the same thing, right? The narrative has not completely changed. Actors change. And one of the elders, Congolese elders, he makes me laugh. One day I was with him in New York and he was talking in parable. He said, you see the sun up in the sky. He said, this is the same sun that the first human saw. I said, okay. Then you repeat the same thing. You see the sun that you see here? That's the sun that Jesus saw. I say, oh, okay. You see the same sun? That's what we are also seeing. We literally seeing the same sun. So what has changed? I say, just like a movie in Hollywood, they film it in the same studio, just use different actor to shape different narrative. It's actually the same studio, right? And the more I've engaged in the work on the Congo, even though the Congo situation is dire, I realize it's not just the story of the Congolese. It's the story of those who own the land, those who are blessed with resources anywhere around the world, that when you see the conflict, as Wangari Maathai said, right? That wherever you see wars in Africa, it's always about resources. She said it before she passed away in one of the speeches she had in Nairobi. So those things stay with me that the situation has changed. People are getting to know the Congo now. What I was saying in 2008 is what I'm saying now. What I say in 2015 is what I'm saying now. The war in the Congo is a resource war waged by US and British allies, Rwanda and Uganda, who invaded the Congo twice in 96 and 98 and continue to support proxy rebel militias. But when you pull up the media articles now, they'll talk to you about the M23. They're irrelevant. M23 used to be CNDP. They'll tell you that there are 120 rebel groups. It's irrelevant. These rebel groups don't make weapons. No, they'll say that the Congolese government is corrupt. It's irrelevant. The United States recognized a fraudulent elections in the DRC. Then you start seeing that it's actually the Congolese who are trapped in a vicious circle, but Africans don't understand that it's on purpose. It's really by design. As long as Congo is not free, Africa can move forward. It's the only African countries with non-bordering nations with wealth that can transform the African continent. That Kwame Nkrumah already knew this in the 40s and he fought to liberate his country when in his Independence Day speech saying that the independence of Ghana is meaningless if it's not tied to the total liberation of the entire African continent. And then in his plan of a United States of Africa, guess where the capital was? Kinshasa. When you read Challenge of the Congo, you actually read the plan. What did he think of the Congo? Because of its potential. In the 50s, they knew that the Congo River can provide the electricity to the entire African continent. So to go back to that question, nothing has changed. Actors may change here and there, but the reason why we have a conflict is still the same. And unfortunately, millions have lost their lives as the world still trying to understand what's happening, but we continue to remain resolute to repeat the same thing over and over until it clicks. And then people start asking themselves questions.
You mentioned telling the same story over and over again, which is humbling and necessary for us to understand and appreciate, given your role in advocacy, but also just somebody who calls that home. If you were to ask better questions of yourself or tell a better story, what direction would that take? What should we be asking? What should we be understanding that hasn't yet been told or yet been understood? You mentioned some key things. The political forces are significant, both regionally and globally. And even having this interview with you, to be honest with you, for me, I feel ill-equipped. I'm not an expert on the DRC or on African politics, but I care deeply about what happens in the continent. So speak to someone like me about the questions and the understanding that is not yet there that should be rising to the surface.
What is like in most of the analysis? I may not go direct to your question, but
Sure.
just to share what it's like, is the story of resistance of the Congolese. And it's not about the conflict now, it's even since King Leopold II. Congolese have faced tremendous suffering when the Portuguese came when they came for slavery. Same thing happened when King Leopold came and was taking rubber and ivory, right? But we don't hear the story of resistance. Because when you hear the story of resistance, then you ask yourself, why are Congolese people fighting? We hear the suffering, the death toll, that not the Congolese are resisting, right? It's unheard of to have over 6 million Congolese people, human beings, killed while they were just sitting down and waiting to be killed. The numbers are so high because Congolese are resisting. But why are Congolese resisting? As Congolese have shared with me many times, is the question of the land. Likambo Mabele, as we say in Lingala, it's even in those who listen to Congolese music, Franco, on the question of the land. The people who own the land, who are custodian of the land, have a responsibility for humanity. That's how I even look at it. That the way capitalism is engaging on this planet is destroying the land. And I'll use my community. I am from North Kivu. I'm Nande. And in our community, when a child is born, you plant a tree. And when an elder dies, you plant a tree. So we have forests in our village where you can go in North Kivu where they're telling you the story of the people. This is your grandfather. This is your aunt. This is you when you were born, right? Naturally, we are environmentalists. So cutting the tree is sacrilege. But what happens when you cut a tree where under that tree there are resources? And Hollywood showed us this story when you watch Avatar, the first Avatar,
Mm-hmm.
right? So when I saw that, I said, this is actually my culture. I know about that. Now, people have resisted to protect the land, not because they want the diamonds, not because they want the gold, because they understand that they are custodians of the land and we should not destroy that land.
Mm-hmm.
Now, how do you get access to that land with that wealth where people are there? You create a narrative.
Mm-hmm.
How do you create that narrative? You either talk about there is an ethnic conflict among people who live together for thousands of years. You start talking about the inadequacy of human beings of ruling themselves when they have a history of having empires and kingdoms with functioning government,
Mm-hmm.
where the Congo kingdom had emissaries in Portugal in the 1500s, right?
Yes.
You start speaking about that they don't know how to manage their economy. When we look at the Cuba kingdom, that they were using copper, the copper cross,
Yes.
as a currency. Like you start seeing that whatever they say is a narrative that doesn't make any sense.
Mm-hmm.
But for the purpose of the media narrative, that's what people are going to continue to explain. But they will not talk about the resistance. Communities will protect themselves from militias. Like even today,
Mm-hmm.
since May, at the beginning of May, the town of Rubaya, which is the center of where coltan is exploited, is under the hands of the M23 rebels, right?
Mm-hmm.
Most coltan of the world comes from Rubaya. So they control it. This week, the M23 is going houses to houses, getting the young people out of there. And video is circulating where they show the M23 talking to young people, telling them that you have to fight for your country, voluntarily join and get on the track. So there is a video this week circulating
Mm-hmm.
of hundreds of young people joining the M23 militia. Then speaking to a contact there, and he says, if rebels are coming with guns in front of your house and say all the kids come out and they run you guys in circle and tell you guys to go in the truck, if you were here, won't you get in the truck?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Because if you don't, you will be killed, right? But beyond that, there is resistance.
Yeah.
That even though they are doing this operation, at the same time they're doing the operation today, I have the information that people are being forced into a militia group. And that will not be in any news article anywhere saying that the West Congolese resistance, there are Congolese who are working hand in hand, be it inside and outside, to denounce what's happening and to resist the oppression. So that's what has been missing, is to share the different story of resistance from King Leopold to present, actually even to present.
Yeah.
Congo would have been carved up a long time ago if the Congolese people did not have a national identity saying that North Kivu cannot just be another country.
Yes.
Katanga seceded, but Katanga is back, right? There was this whole discussion about Congo need to secede or discussing the colonial borders. I'm a Pan-Africanist. I'm more for African unity. So anybody who's discussing the carving up of the Congo of any other African country, I'm saying we actually need to come together as a continent rather than becoming smaller states. So that's my goal as a Pan-Africanist, unity. And there are people who are struggling to make sure that Congo is united and that Africa becomes more united today.
Thank you for that, Kambale. It's so important that we appreciate and understand the spirit of the people and the spirit of the country, that it is one of resistance. And there's evidence of that throughout Congo's history, as you said, whether we see it or not, it's there. But, we also live in this context where headlines matter. They can move the political will of neighboring countries or internal people. Resources matter because they move the economic arm of countries. And so, President Tshisekedi was elected again in the end of last year for another 5-year term. Given that we live in the reality where political systems are still there, right, despite this history and the important movement of the people to resist, what could a successful new 5-year term look like for him as the current president? What would success look like to you if he achieved one or two things? Even though you've said quite strongly, some of these actors are just recycled, and it's true. This is our reality.
Right, it's an imposed reality. I will respond that this. I'll try to be nice and respond to that question. The successful term for him will be peace and stability in DRC. But for him to achieve peace and stability in DRC, he must understand that peace doesn't come without justice.
Yes.
There is no such thing as peace without justice. And as long as we're not addressing the question of justice in DRC, we will know no peace in DRC. Why? We are literally witnessing people who killed civilians in the 1990s who are still running around with rebel militias today. Sultani Makenga, a rebel of the M23, was part of the AFDL in 1996, the AFDL rebel group that came in to topple Mobutu. Sultani Makenga today, he's still running. And these rebels are saying what, right? They're saying that some of the reasons why they are fighting, if we have to use the story of 2012, is because the Congolese government did not implement the March 23, 2009 agreement with the rebel group. People have not read that agreement, right? The agreement says amnesty for crimes committed. What are the crimes that we're talking about? Let me talk about just Kiwanja in 2008, where a town that came and massacred civilians, raped women in public, and they said that we're not going to follow up with that, right? We're not going to try them for that. And that's what they're fighting. Just in 2022, this same rebel group did the same exact thing in Kishishe. The same thing that happened in Kiwanja in 2008 is the same thing that did in a different town. So what we're seeing that there is recidivism because we're not enforcing justice. And that's the part that I think the government, Tshisekedi, is not doing. I don't know if it's willingly or unwillingly. And for me, the reason it's happening is because it's the same system. But we're living in very interesting time on the African continent. We have, as Pan-Africanists, we have to look at the trend on the African continent. We have Senegal, and we have Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso. Those two are progressive change going in the right direction. Some are military coups, and Senegal is the people uprising. But it shares the two stories share something very important about the people. In the two scenarios, in these two countries, the people rejected the neo-colonial system that existed in the country and they want a new leadership. On one hand, the military took over that, the vacuum that existed. On the other hand, popular organization in the streets allow for Macky Sall not to be president. So as I look at the contradictions in the Congo and I've seen the leaders that we have, my message is not for what Tshisekedi has to do. It's what the Congolese people must do. They must actually look at what we are dealing with in the world today, what we are dealing with on the African today. What we are dealing with in the African today is enshrined in the speech of Diomaye Faye of Senegal when he's speaking about a left Pan-Africanism, when he's speaking about a Pan-Africanism of the peoples, where the leaders are putting the people first in every single decisions. As you are now talking about what Tshisekedi is doing, the biggest scandal in the Congolese government today is that they install lights, street lights in the city of Kinshasa when one of the pole cost $4,000. How are they using state resources to literally destroy the country, right? So there are things they can do, but it's still up to the Congolese to determine their affairs, to take control of the matters in the country.
Which makes me wonder from where you sit, what when you speak to the diaspora, when you speak to people at home, what do you have a call to action for, my friend who's here in Nairobi, my Congolese sister, for others, what do you say to your fellow people around what they can do? Because, it's so hard to ask those who are under these systems to then change the system. It's almost an impossible ask, and yet they're the only ones who can. What's your message to your fellow Congolese across the world?
I believe you can. Not the leaders. I believe literally you, Lily, you can change the Congo. If it wasn't for a Congolese sister Pamela, you and I will not be speaking today. She did her work, she did her job to make sure that our story is heard. And it's important for the story to be heard in Kenya.
Yes.
It's important for the story to be heard also on the African continent. I'll explain why. We had Kenyan troops in DRC as part of the EAC. How many Kenyans follow very closely the impact of the Kenyan troops? Did people even ask why today in the DRC the largest banks are Kenyans? Literally, the financial sector in DRC is controlled by Kenyan capital. When people are protesting in Nairobi around cost of living, around floods, do they know that the Kenyan bank Equity, right, made so much money in DRC that for the first time in their history, they paid dividend to their investors? That every financial transaction that the DRC actually make, the DRC government makes, is now done through Equity Bank. How many Kenyans know that interest?
Yeah.
So we as Congolese, we are very interested in connecting and saying that the struggle of the Kenyans to determine their affairs in their country is tied to the liberation of the Congo and vice versa.
Yes.
And start sharing that if your troops are coming to help us, this is what we need. That the town of Bunagana is not a buffer zone, is a territory of the DRC, and that your troops should not be using that the space as a buffer zone. That's one thing. That if there are people doing illicit trades of resources on DRC, Congo's goals go through Nairobi and ends up in Dubai.
Yeah.
Anybody in Nairobi actually stopping the illicit trade? So those are the concrete things that ordinary people can do as they get to know more information about the DRC at the local level, start raising those issues by connecting it to the local struggles. Because I've seen the protests in Nairobi, and I was very happy to see that it's everywhere. Africans are saying we want another way of ruling our countries.
Absolutely.
We want another way of changing the society that we live in. So you can change. People listening can change, but they should not look at the issue of the Congo as a separate issue. They should look at it and say, how do I bring the story of the Congo in my day-to-day work? That Congo is actually in Mombasa at the port. Congo is in Nairobi with the trade of mineral resources. Congo is in our politics and so on.
It signals what's important. It signals who has power. Yeah, absolutely. Kambale, I would be remiss if I didn't also talk to you about you've just brought so much to the forefront of my thinking, and from the colonial history to our ancient history as a continent to our current day. You've taken us on a journey between so many stages and seasons of the history of Congo, and it's important that we appreciate very deeply the absolute brutal reign of the Belgian state in the Congo, and how that is 100% connected to where we are now, especially when it comes to resource distribution and resources. So I want hit on three quick things before we let you go, because this internet is not cooperating with us. But the first is around
Yes.
resources. The incredible resources in the Congo. You've mentioned them already a few times, from uranium to cobalt to gold. In your mind, and of course, I'm not charging you as being the minister of mineral affairs or anything like that, but I would be, from where you sit as an activist, is there a path for an equitable, sustainable resource management in the DRC?
Yes. Actually, even for the world. I mean, let's really call it out.
Mm-hmm.
I will be very much more blunt. The problem with the Congo is capitalism, and it's
Yeah.
capitalism for profit, right? Where it has no respect for human life or the environment. There is a way. Congo doesn't need to exploit these mineral resources. We're not exploiting it for the Congolese. Congo has 86 million hectares of land, arable land, that is unused. This land can literally feed the entire African continent. It can actually feed 9 billion people. That's the agricultural capacity of Congo's arable land. I said it in the beginning, it's the second largest African country by size, with 86 million
Yeah.
hectares of arable land unused. I mean, what can we even do with food exports,
Yeah.
right? So it's not the cobalt, it's not the gold, the diamond. I remember even growing up in DRC, there were these young people, we call them Bana Lunda. They would go to Lunda to get diamonds. There were those also who will go to Cabinda, right, in Angola to get diamonds, right? You
Mm.
see a kid in the neighborhood, does not have resources, say, you know what, I'm gonna become an artisanal miner, go get some diamonds. That's not what I did as a kid, right? I went to school. I wanted to become a lawyer when I
Mm.
graduated.
Mm.
Congolese are not growing up and saying that all we want is getting mineral resources. No. What they're saying is they want better access to healthcare, housing, uh, education, opportunities, those natural human aspiration. Now, why today, in
Yes.
2024, we are seeing the violence that we see? Is because at the heart of the fourth industrial revolution, which is moving us from fossil fuel to renewable energy, you can move there without Congo's cobalt. You can move there without the lithium in
Right.
Manono. Now, how do we actually get it? Do we have to kill people to get it? No. Do you know why I know? Because sometimes people will say that the notion of resource curse. Nobody's talking about resource curse in Norway. It's a resource rich country. So what do we have to have the resource curse? It's not the resource that's the curse. It's capitalism that's the curse, right? Because if people in Norway can have sovereign
Yeah.
funds with the oil exploitation that they have in the country, so that people in Norway can have good healthcare, good education. Everybody talk about how Norway is managing well the resources. We all have studied outside of our countries, our home countries. We've been in school with all of them. None of them are smarter than us. We know who came to our study groups where we
Yes.
had to teach them what we learned in our own countries. So it's not that we don't know how to manage. We should listen to also what Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso said in an interview he had with the journalist Alain Foucault about the challenges of dealing with international partners. That there are things that they will not sell to Africans because of IPs, intellectual property rights.
Mm.
So people decide, well, so if you're not going to sell us the machine that will allow us to make generic HIV drugs for our population, we'll go to Russia and China. The moment you go there, or Wagner, or the Chinese, right? So we can manage our
Right.
resources. We do have the policies, the documentation. There are many African scholars, even Congolese scholars, who have provided the way forward. But anyone who dares to implement these policies, what happens to them is they face either the death They face coup d'etats. Uh, they depose. I mean, look at Patrice Lumumba, our first democratically elected leader, who said that he wanted the resources of the Congo to benefit the Congolese people. And they send a message to Congolese: if you dare become Lumumba, we will depose you, we will kill you, we'll cut you into pieces, we'll put you in acid, and decades later, we'll send the tooth back to your country, and no one will be held accountable for it. But what's happening is that this generation, right? And that's what I say, it's not just the Congo. Across the African continent, young Africans are rising up and speaking of Pan Africanism and thinking about the Pan African unity. In the Congo is also happening, right? That's the way forward. Even though they killed our leaders, their ideas continue up until today, and that the people today are calling for the control of their land, control of their resources, while we may have governmental challenges, but in the end, we know what we need, and and we will continue to fight to determine our own affairs and reach our liberation as we want as we want to see it.
So, young people are going to be critical for the future of our continent. We know the statistics tell us that they make up a majority of the population across the continent, and this place will be theirs and is theirs. You have invested deeply in young people and empowering them through your work in many different places, including the Congo Leadership Initiative. Tell me what your message is to young people about their role in shaping the future. What are you learning from them? What would you want to say to them? What is their role?
And I don't have much to really share with them. It's not like I have some wisdom. I think that they are much more, how would I say, they are much more inspiring to me than me sharing something to them. So what I always remind them is that they are doing things that I didn't even do when I was their age. I use the example of young Congolese that I saw a few months back. We had protests in front of the U.S. embassy, the French embassy, the European Union delegation office, and also the British embassy. And these protests, I saw young Congolese burning the U.S. flag, burning the French flag, burning the British flag, even the EU flag. Why were they doing so? They understand that what we say, Rwanda and Uganda invaded the Congo. These are US and British allies. The Western nations are supporting them, providing them with the weaponry and support. And they took it upon themselves to go to this embassy to denounce their actions of supporting aggressor nations on the continent. That's one. Two, it's not just an example of the Congo, it's more an experience I had in the United States, in Ferguson. I spent
Mm.
some time in Ferguson in 2015, 2014 and 2015. And while I was there, I met some of the most courageous young people I've ever met. When I organized protests in New York City, be it in front of the United Nations and so on, I went to City Hall. Then I went there, I had to fill out the form and say, on this date, at this time, I will be at this location to do XYZ. And they gave me an authorization, a permission that now you can protest. And then there will be the police on one side, on the other side, with our signs, and we say, yes, we did an action. These young people did not get a permit. They were literally
Yeah.
walking in the middle of the street, blocking traffic. And I was very confused. I was with them. And they were asking me for my wisdom. I said, I can give you my wisdom. My wisdom will be go to City Hall and get a permission to protest. You did not do that. You actually got things involved. That I believe that young people, especially now when we're looking at what's happening in Rafah, I mean Gaza, how young students all across the United States are mobilizing. How we're seeing even in the struggle of Palestine, people are speaking about the Congo and Sudan. These are young people
Yes.
doing that, right? They're connecting the struggles that this generation have more tools, are much more courageous, and of course, they're living in much more dire conditions than before. when we look at the situation in
Mm,
the DRC, where the numbers that I've read from the World Bank in terms of unemployment ranges from 60% to 90%,
mm,
depending on when it was written, right? It's really the informal economy that's keeping the Congolese people alive, right? They're living in conditions where, in the case of Goma, right, where the routes that brings food has been stopped by militia groups, and the cost of living in Goma is extreme lately, right? So they're living even under harsher conditions than what we lived in. Then back to the DRC, a bad accomplishment of this youth. That's why I say it's really hard for me to give them an advice about look at what I did because they are on another level. It is because of the Congolese youth that we have a new president in the Congo today. Joseph Kabila was determined to stay for a third term and find a way, constitutionally or unconstitutionally, to actually stay in power. In January of 2015, the Congolese parliament passed a law, a bill, that, of course, it didn't become a law. They passed a bill that will have made it mandatory that before elections in 2016 that we have a national census, which will have de facto delayed the election forever because of the size of the country, the logistical challenges, and so on. Young Congolese took it to the streets. For 2 weeks, they shut down the city of Kinshasa, but they pay a heavy price. Many were harmed, many were killed. The numbers were released were low to 40 to 50 people killed. We know it was more. And thankfully, because of the report by Human Rights Watch, we know that it's more than 40 people were killed. But they didn't die in vain because all the organizings with all these young people forced Kabila to not stand
mm,
for a third term. And that story is not told, right? That these young people, every time I speak to them, I share with them. I can share what I said, but what you guys are doing are much more radical. That's bringing us much more
yeah,
closer to our liberation. It's not perfect. You stopped Kabila from staying in power. We still have to deal with the current situation, but you
mm,
made that happen. Not me, but your actions on the ground. So that's really what I share with them is to encourage what they're doing by using Fanon's quote that each generation must find its mission, either fulfill it and betray it in relative opacity. And the Congolese youth have found this mission and they are fulfilling it
mm,
so well that I'm so confident Congo
mm.
will be free.
You really moved me. I'm both feeling such pride and also overwhelmed with emotion just to hear you speak the names of young people who gave their lives and the ultimate sacrifice for their people and for freedom, for liberation. Kambale, it's really been an honor to have you with us. I'm humbled that you took the time of all the demands on you to share your work and your vision for a free Congo with us. Before we say farewell, we always like to close our show with two questions for all of our guests because we believe that there is a connection, as you said before, our liberation is tied up together. So we'd like to see what those connections are through two questions, one very silly one and one a bit more with more depth. So Kambale, this afternoon or morning, wherever you may be, we want to know what's your favorite beverage? What's your beverage of choice when you are thirsty?
Oh, that's where you get me to be
Exactly.
non-political, and I'm ashamed to say I love Pepsi,
Don't be ashamed.
right? I'm like, oh man,
Don't be
know,
ashamed. If I
um,
was there,
definitely not a
listen,
political
you
decision.
can you be allowed at least one. You can be allowed at least one. Um,
you
it's
know, But one thing that's not a
yeah.
drink, by the way, is it's not a drink, but it's more a dessert. My favorite dessert is called Kambale
Okay.
Delight, and I'll explain
Okay.
it to you. There is only one place you can get it. It's called it's a small promotion of this place, the Cold Stone ice
Okay.
cream place. What you do is you get vanilla ice cream on the
Hmm.
left, chocolate ice cream
Okay.
on the right. In the middle, you put brownie. You chopped it up, mix it up, and you put it in the cup. But before you put it in the cup, At the bottom, you put hot
Okay.
fudge chocolate. Then you put the bowl of ice cream. And on the top, you put a regular fudge so it doesn't melt the top of the ice cream. So that's
Oh,
my favorite
listen,
dessert.
Kambale, I'm actually a chef and I actually make my own homemade hot fudge. So, Karibu, Kenya, so I
Oh,
can hook you up with the Kambale a la Nairobi
definitely.
special. And my
Definitely.
final question
Definitely.
to you, Kambale, and you touched on it at least for me in your last response about young people, but we would love to know, what is bringing you joy today?
The André Blouin Cultural Center in Kinshasa. It's a cultural center launched by Congo Love. It's a nonprofit that I work with closely. André Blouin is a name of a woman, and this woman was the chief of protocol of Patrice Lumumba. She wrote the Independence Day
Wow.
speech that Patrice Lumumba read on June 30th. So when people say combattant de l'indépendance aujourd'hui victorieux, je vous salue. Fathers for independence today victorious, I salute you. Those words were written by a woman that history has erased. And a group of young Congolese decided to build a center in the Congo named
Wow.
after her. What's important about her is that one, she was not Congolese, she was Central
Wow.
African. Two, she grew up in Congo Brazzaville. Three, she worked with Kwame Nkrumah and Sekou Touré. Four, she was sent to the Congo by Sekou Touré as a mission and say, you speak Congo, you know the culture there because you also grew up in Congo Brazzaville and Kinshasa. Go help Patrice Lumumba. Go help Gizenga, Parti Solidaire Africain. Lumumba was Mouvement National Congolais. Go help them for the election of May 1960. She came down to the Congo. She mobilized. She had a radio show in the 60s. She also is the only person I know in the history of Congo for having 45,000 women sign into a political program.
Wow.
I have not heard of anybody do that.
Wow.
And she spoke the local language. She spoke Ikong and she did that. So when they discover that her story was literally erased, but you can open Larry Devlin's book, the CIA chief of station, his book, you will see him write about Madame Bloin. You can put her name online that this woman had an impact on the Congo, but they've hidden her name. So they build a cultural center in the Congo named after her. Why? One, to tell Congolese that you don't have to be Congolese to change
Mm.
the Congo. She was not Congolese, but she came and was so influential in the cabinet of Patrice Lumumba, our
Mm.
prime minister. Two, Pan Africanism, right? As a
Yes.
Pan Africanist, she saw the issue of the Congo Central. Three, women roll out completely
Yeah.
erased. How many people know that that speech was written by
Mm.
Patrice Lumumba? I'm sorry, by
Yeah.
André Bloin, right? Everybody talks about
Yeah.
Patrice Lumumba. Oh, he had this fiery
Mm.
speech, and the King of Belgium. A woman politically influenced Patrice Lumumba to know the importance of that moment. That moment was so important for Congolese because people died before Lumumba. That we needed to recognize their struggle. And she made sure that the story of the struggle of the Congolese was in our Independence Day speech. So that today, when we wonder what was the struggle before independence, all I have to do is read what
Yeah.
she wrote,
Powerful.
right? So that's what gives me hope that they are lifting up the past stories to build the present for a future right in Kinshasa. That gives
Mm.
me hope. The second thing that gives me hope is the revival of Pan Africanism, not the Pan Africanism of EcoBank, where EcoBank has an office in Nairobi, in Kinshasa, in Accra. Now they call themselves Pan African Bank. That's not the Pan Africanism that we're talking about. The Pan Africanism that we're talking about is the Pan Africanism of the people, where the people of Mali, Niger, and Burkina are saying we have to come together to share our resources, to build a new condition so that our people can have electricity before our uranium is lighting up one out of three light bulbs in France, right? How do we build a coalition? When I'm seeing what happened with Jomai Faye in Senegal, that young people
Mm.
came out in the streets, right, saying Sonko
Mm.
president, and that the political leaders moved above personal interests and put the interests of the people first. Sonko, who was the leader, stepped down and let the Secretary General of his party, Pastef, become the president. And they came from jail to the palace,
Yeah.
right? That gives me that hope to see this revival of Pan Africanism where Africans are saying, now is the time, even with the suffering of the Congo. I am so hopeful for the future of Africa when I look at the African continent and the movement taking place. And all we have to do now is
Yeah.
connect, share the story of struggle, and support one another in all of our liberations.
Thank you, Kambale. You've left me speechless, and I am a professional talker, and you've left me without words. Thank you for your spirit, for your diligence, for your dedication to our liberation collectively. I'm so grateful that we had this time together. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. And
See
see
you
you in
in
Nairobi.
Nairobi. I hope it's soon. And listeners, we would love to hear your thoughts on this episode. You can send us a message on all of our platforms at Salam and Hello, SELAM. And of course, we would love it if you would share this episode. It's so important that Kambale's message of this Pan African collectivism is shared. And so share it, be in touch with us. And of course, we'll see you next week. Peace.
Worried, anxious group of people trying to move along. Maybe one day we'll get onto something. Until then, we say, hold on. I know it's hard, but baby, you just got to hold on.